34 days, an 84-year-old woman, blood on her doorstep, a masked armed intruder caught on camera. Yet there's no arrest, there's no suspect named, and there is no closure. The Nancy Guthrie case is gripping the nation, but the harder question is, has the Pima County Sheriff's Office failed this investigation? And if so, can anyone hold them legally accountable? As a criminal defense attorney of over 2 decades, allow me to break this down today. So first we have the idea of a crime scene contamination. The crime scene reportedly was left open and unprotected. There was no security tape, no perimeter. 2 reporters allegedly were allowed access to the crime scene area, which is a big no-no. The scene was described as grossly contaminated, and a contaminated crime scene, ladies and gentlemen, can destroy a prosecution long before it even begins. And Pima County deputies also overlook a roof-mounted camera during their very initial inspection. So a lot of lost time here. And then, we've got the idea of a missing aircraft. So Sheriff Nanos of Pima County Sheriff's Department is accused of not getting a thermal imaging search plane airborne for 3 hours after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. The alleged reason, well, he's clashed apparently with the only deputy who knew how to fly this plane. What did he do? He reassigned the guy because they had a clash. He reassigned the guy to street patrol. What? 3 hours in a kidnapping case is a lifetime. It's time that you just cannot get back. And then there's also the leadership optics. The idea that on February 7th, when Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released a video begging for their mother's return, Sheriff Nanos was seen attending a University of Arizona basketball game. I mean, come on, dude. Like, literally, please, don't be socializing during this critical time. And what really, really irks me, y'all, is that he has turned federal resources away. Like, no thank you. This is my case. This is my little turf, and I'm going to handle this like I'm doing such a great job, right? So let's start with his resistance towards the FBI and their parallel investigation. He should have immediately deferred to the FBI, and he didn't. And he should have sort of allowed the FBI to use its resources, which is infinite, in a timely way. He didn't. He took critical evidence and sent it to a private lab instead of sending it to FBI's Quantico lab, located in Quantico, Virginia. Now, recently, as of yesterday, we learned that the United Cajun Navy has submitted a detailed 41-page operational plan to Sheriff Nanos in late February. The plan offers dozens of search dogs and advanced drone technology to sweep the rugged Catalina foothills terrain, essentially really helping with the search for Nancy Guthrie. As of March 5th, Nanos has still not signed off, citing concerns about contaminating a live criminal investigation. Well, sir, you've already contaminated the crime scene. What are you talking about? This really got under my skin. And this group has been trying for nearly a week to get a response from him. They will not begin deploying their resources until it is greenlit by Sheriff Nanos. And he is just crickets, right? Even the president of Pima County Deputies Association has said publicly, more bodies are always better than one. I don't get why Sheriff Nanos has a death grip, no pun intended, on this investigation. Like, he doesn't want to let go, like it's his baby and they're going to find Nancy Guthrie or, more like her remains. And he's going to say, whoa, I did it. It was my department. Bro, step aside. This ain't about you and this power struggle. Let the feds do their job. This is why I'm so upset at the way that this is going. And Brian Enton is on the ground doing great reporting on this. And it's becoming more and more evident that Sheriff Nanos' messaging is inconsistent and that he's made a lot of missteps, a lot of failures, omissions, and untimely responses. And he is still not letting go of this investigation. So, this criticism isn't just coming from the outside externally, it's coming from the inside as well. Retired SWAT commander Lieutenant Bob Kryger has said that 98% of the department had given Nanos a no confidence vote, meaning, sir, please leave, step down from your position. The most, I think, experienced homicide detective has only 3 years of experience in this Pima County Sheriff's Department, because all the really good veteran detectives have left because of Sheriff Nanos. Okay, so, and when we're talking about this investigation, it has been a catastrophe and a national embarrassment. So now let me give you some legal analysis. There's a Supreme Court case from 1989 called DeShaney versus Winnebago County, okay? And it basically says that the government has no constitutional duty to protect you from private harm, and that the Constitution protects against government action, but it's not a guarantee of government services. Law enforcement's failure to solve a crime does not automatically create civil or criminal liability. And again, I want to go back to the idea of the Constitution protecting an affirmative action taken by a police department, but not a guarantee of services that you expect from that police department. So failures, omissions, things that we're seeing with Nanos. There's also qualified immunity that shields law enforcement from personal liability under conduct that violates clearly established law. There's an extraordinarily high bar. Courts routinely dismiss these cases, even when there's absolute negligence and just incompetence and sloppy law enforcement work. Look at what happened in Uvalde. They all got acquitted, right? So a very high bar to find legal liability by a law enforcement officer, a sheriff of a county, a law enforcement agency. It's a very, very high bar, and negligence alone does not pierce qualified immunity. And then you have Arizona as a state, its own sovereign immunity. The idea that government entities enjoy sovereign immunity for discretionary acts. He can very well say, well, in my experience, according to my discretion, I did everything that I was supposed to do in this investigation. I want to say this. There are instances, very limited, where there's specific promises made to victims, like the Guthrie family. We are going to do X, Y, and Z, and then you fail to do it. We don't have any information that that was the case here. If that was, then there's a special relationship doctrine that is triggered, and that could mean some liability or culpability. It requires a showing of deliberate indifference, not mere negligence, but actual conscious disregard, right? Which is, again, a very, very high and difficult bar. And then you can bring an action under state level civil rights claims, which depends on Arizona law. But realistically, you guys, the accountability mechanisms here are political. They're not judicial. They're not legal, right? You got elections, vote this guy out. You've got oversight hearings and legislative investigations into this department's investigation of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance and what they didn't do, etc. You've got internal affairs and a DOJ review where the feds come in. We've seen this happen a lot in historical cases. They come in and look at what was done and not done, right? And they're going to clearly investigate through the FBI to see what the pushback was by Nanos when FBI is offering to do certain things. And then we have the Court of Public Opinion, which is already in session right here on serving justice. The law gives law enforcement enormous protection from civil liability, and there are legitimate reasons for that. Investigations are complex. Hindsight is 20/20. We don't want officers paralyzed by the fear that they're going to get sued, right? But protection from liability, legal liability, is not the same thing as freedom from accountability. And that's what I'm talking about here. It's going to be more political than it is going to be legal. So the law may not give the Guthrie family a lawsuit, but it cannot take away the truth.
41 days missing now for Nancy Guthrie. The 84-year-old last seen alive on the night of January 31st. And now, after weeks of investigating, authorities believe they may know why she was targeted. The Pima County Sheriff hinting at that, but declining to provide more details about the suspected motive. Investigators still have not publicly identified the masked man seen on that front door surveillance camera the night Nancy went missing. Officials also still working to process mixed DNA found at her property. Senior national correspondent Brian Inton has been reporting from Tucson since Guthrie's kidnapping. Joins us live. So, Brian, could the missing puzzle piece be this DNA analysis?
Yeah, that's what we are all hoping, Nicole, though there seems to be some complications with the DNA. You mentioned it, though, day 41, a few big headlines today. The sheriff was asked, do you think that this suspect could strike again? And he responded, absolutely. That was in a new interview from yesterday, which was kind of chilling to hear him say that. At the same time, he did say they still believe that the abduction was targeted, although he said they can't be 100% sure. And he said they do have a theory about what happened, but they weren't willing to release it at this point. In terms of the DNA, though, again, the DNA inside the house seems to be what could really crack the case open. We've been told that there's complications with it in the past, that some of it may be mixed together, multiple people's DNA all mixed together, which can be hard for experts to separate. But you remember the picture of the suspect on the outside, Nicole, when he had the flashlight in his mouth. There was one point where he had the flashlight in his mouth. I spoke with a DNA expert at Arizona State University who said that really stood out to her because saliva is one of the best ways to get someone's DNA. And that flashlight to her was just really, really important, she said. Listen to what she told me. You know, he had the flashlight in his mouth in that one photo. What does that say to you? Could that be helpful for DNA?
Yes, as a forensic serologist, I would have cued into that immediately and said that is a great source of DNA. So I would have asked, did they recover that flashlight? Because I would want to swab the end of that flashlight that was in his mouth where he was depositing saliva on it. Because I know from the video that if he's got it in his mouth, he's leaving saliva behind, and that's a really strong source of DNA.
And also, Nicole, while he had the mask on his face, you noticed that his mouth was not covered with the mask, which is also a good sign for DNA because his saliva would be coming out, getting on things in the house. That's something else that they could test, Nicole.
All right, so we know, Brian, obviously NewsNation is staying on this case. You are still out there reporting live. We know there is still so much interest in this case. Kind of walk us through what the scene is like there now, more than 40 days into this search.
Yeah, it's very quiet at this point, honestly, Nicole. You know, we've still seen FBI and sheriff's deputies in the neighborhood a little bit. They were out here earlier in the week. But for the most part, it's quiet out here. We know they have this task force behind the scenes that they continue to work really around the clock, working the tips. There are people dedicated to the case. But it's been relatively quiet out here today, Nicole.
All right, Brian Inton live for us there in Tucson as the search continues for Nancy Guthrie. Thank you.
Okay, this is big. Now, as you may know, it has been 40 long days since 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie went missing from her Arizona home. And while we still haven't learned who allegedly kidnapped Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie's mother, we have learned something else. We have learned a pretty astounding revelation about another case that you're probably familiar with and may now relate to what we're talking about, because it turns out NewsNation viewers aren't the only ones who think that Brian Inton's reporting is top-notch, because apparently quadruple murderer Brian Kohberger is also a fan of our intrepid reporter. You see, Kohberger was apparently watching videos of Inton covering his case before he was ever arrested for the brutal murders of 4 college students, which I gotta say, more than a little frightening, right? But it does raise an interesting question. Could Nancy Guthrie's alleged kidnapper also be watching Inton's coverage of this crime? He's been on the leading edge of every new development, so it would make sense that whoever took Nancy has been following him in hopes of maybe staying ahead of investigators, right? Joining me now for more on this revelation, this strange revelation, is NewsNation senior national correspondent Brian Inton. Brian, my gosh, how did you learn that Kohberger was following you?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is kind of creepy to think about. I guess I wasn't that surprised. But the way I learned about it is because, remember, the digital forensic experts who went through his phone, to get ready for trial with Celebrate, they actually told me, like, hey, just so you know, he was watching your videos. He was following your reporting, and they actually sent me a screen grab. You know, they used the software to pull the information off of his phone, and there was me, a picture of me doing one of my videos.
This is it. We're showing it right here.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that they sent me, and I haven't really talked much about it. I found this out months ago, just because, I don't know, I guess I maybe tried to put it out of my head. It just kind of creeped me out. But again, I mean, I guess I'm not that surprised, considering, much like with Nancy Guthrie, I was there for months. I was outside the house every day. I was covering every little update, and I've been doing the same thing here. So I guess, you know, you just kind of have to assume whoever did it is probably, you know, trying to take in all the coverage.
So now that thinking about it, processing it, how does it make you feel knowing he's watching your coverage?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, I think I just try to block it out. I mean, I just try to focus on the job and obviously just getting the facts every day and reporting. And I think if I thought about it too much, it would probably just, like, freak me out too much. So I think maybe that's why I haven't talked about the Koberger thing until now, just because I didn't want to think about it much. The same kind of thing with whoever did this to Nancy Guthrie. There is some new information I found out today, though, Jesse, that kind of relates with Nancy Guthrie. You know, the sheriff did a new interview today and said, he was asked specifically, do you think that this suspect could strike again? And he responded, absolutely, which is not something that I was expecting him to say. We're outside his office right now here in Pima County. And he did follow up and say, we still believe that it was targeted, but we can't say that 100%. So that was also just kind of troubling to hear him say. I mean, he literally said absolutely when he was asked if the suspect could strike again.
Okay, so two parts about that. One, it seems to be that he's just hedging his bets, right? He's saying not that he has new evidence to suggest this person's on a spree and is going to attack somebody else, but we just can't definitively say if it was targeted. But Brian, look, I have to ask you this: if we're talking about Koberger following your reporting before he was caught, and you maybe have to assume that's maybe why he was following you, for maybe to get ahead of investigators. Do you think the person or persons who allegedly kidnapped Nancy may be following your reporting? There's no reporter I know that has been more on this than you. And now if you're hearing this from the sheriff that, you know, this person could still be a danger, I'm throwing it to you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess whoever did this probably is following a lot of reporting, including mine. Again, I'm kind of the one who's been on it every single day. Now it's day 40, so I would imagine so. I mean, there are obviously certain things that we don't always report, things that we find out or we hear about. You kind of have to keep, you know, in perspective here that this person is still on the run. There are parts of this investigation that have to remain secret for obvious reasons. But it's a strange sort of component of this whole thing to think about. I mean, you've been doing crime reporting for probably almost or as long as I have. I mean, I think it's just a reality that we have to deal with. I mean, these people are probably watching us, and it was, like I said, I wasn't totally surprised when I found out that Koberger was, but to see the actual screen grabs of the videos was a little like, oh my gosh.
Well, genealogist Cece Moore has helped solve more than 300 cases, and she says when it comes to Nancy Guthrie, she believes investigative genetic genealogy will crack this case. The technique cracked open the brutal quadruple stabbing murders of the 4 University of Idaho students in November of 2022. Investigators in that case were able to link DNA found on a knife sheath at that crime scene to a relative of Brian Koberger's, and then matched the crime scene DNA to a Q-tip found in Koberger's parents' garbage can, finally solving that case. Genetic genealogy also solved a series of brutal crimes that stumped even the most seasoned of investigators in California for decades. In 2001, DNA technology linked at least 50 rapes and 13 murders to one man dubbed the Golden State Killer. Investigators worked quietly in the wings for years to try to track him down until genetic genealogy became an option. Detectives put DNA from a semen sample into a genealogical website to identify potential family members of the killer, eventually leading them to Joseph James DeAngelo, getting his DNA from a tissue in a trash can. Well, this week on a new episode of my podcast, The Truth of the Matter, I spoke with that woman who's at the forefront of this tech, Cece Moore. Here's part of that new episode. What are your overarching thoughts about the Nancy Guthrie case and what genetic genealogy can do here? What are the lessons that you've learned?
I don't even like to think of this, but if there is a second crime scene that is discovered, or her, remains, then that gives them another opportunity to find DNA. There was a grandfather kidnapped, a case of mistaken identity apparently in Australia, which isn't getting hardly any coverage. And it's really similar to the Nancy Guthrie case. So I was surprised it wasn't reported on more. They found a second crime scene in his case because he was held somewhere for a while. His name is Chris Bogsarian. Unfortunately, his case has been resolved in, the worst possible way, but there was a time where both of these cases were happening at this exact same time. He was kidnapped February 13th, 2026, late at night. Elderly man, 85-year-old grandfather, who was kidnapped and held and tortured, unfortunately. They believe it was a case of mistaken identity, but he was taken from his home late at night by armed, masked individuals. There was actually a video of him being pushed into their car, and then he was held at a location where by the time they found the location, he was no longer there, but his DNA was all over there. His blood was there. They had cut off his finger. Terrible, but they were able to prove he had been there. And so obviously the perpetrators were there as well, and they would have left their DNA behind as well. And he was unfortunately eventually found deceased. He had no criminal links and was the wrong target.
Gut-wrenching details.
And his neighbors heard screaming and screaming and screaming going on for a long time, and his dogs barking, and no one did anything apparently until they dragged him out of his house and drove away with him. There was time to save him. People need to call 911. I know people don't like to get in other people's business, but if you hear screaming, please call the police and let them deal with it.
Yeah,
Please.
absolutely.
I mean, we don't want to hope for a second crime scene or remains to be found of Nancy. Of course, we all still want to believe she's alive, but she was held somewhere. That alone is a crime, right? If she's kidnapped and held against her will, that place she's being held is a second crime scene. Or if she was deceased, in the car or something, again, that is also what I would call a second crime scene. And so it's just a matter of time before authorities close in on something like that. I really believe that with all the resources, we leave DNA everywhere. Nancy would have left DNA everywhere she was taken, and the perpetrator would have as well. So it's just a matter of finding that. And I believe, these investigators are incredible at their jobs.
What is your gut telling you about the Nancy Guthrie case?
I would still go back and re-swab parts of that house and look for even like a rootless hair. We can solve these cases now with just a rootless hair. I find it very hard to believe the perpetrator didn't leave his DNA behind. We think he had that bite flashlight in his mouth, and I doubt he kept it in his mouth for the full 40 minutes or so that he was there. So as careful as he was to try to not leave his DNA, he would have taken that out of his mouth and he would have immediately had his DNA all over the outside of that glove. And he had to have touched something.
Cece Moore does a deep dive into the Kohberger loophole that no longer exists when it comes to investigative genetic genealogy, and why she says the tech needed to deconvolute that mixed sample may not even exist yet. To hear that full conversation, you can use your phone, scan the QR code on your screen, and find the Truth of the Matter podcast on NewsNation's YouTube page right now, and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
There is breaking news tonight in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Investigators have reportedly uncovered more images from her home camera captured before her disappearance. And tonight as well, the sheriff is raising real concerns that the kidnapper could potentially strike again, as forensic scientists believe DNA now could hold the keys to this case. Our Brian Enton back for us once again. Tucson, Arizona tonight with the very latest. Brian?
Yeah, hey, Blake. It's day 41, if you can believe it, in the search for Nancy Guthrie. I'm still outside Nancy's house here, and there's been quite a few developments over the last 24 hours. You mentioned it. First of all, reports that the FBI now has images from other cameras on Nancy Guthrie's property. Remember, we first only saw the images in the video from the Google Nest camera right on Nancy's front door. We were wondering, because we knew there were other cameras, one on the side, one in the back near the pool, and we are learning now that the FBI FBI was able to obtain images from those other cameras, but here's the catch. It's not video, it's actually only thumbnail images. So every time motion was detected, apparently a thumbnail image was created, and that is what the FBI has. They don't have the full images or the videos, just the little thumbnails. And we are told that anything around the time frame of when Nancy was abducted is missing, is not there, which is kind of interesting to think about why that time frame is missing. You know, there's been these questions about, was there like a signal blocker used? Some other neighbors reported internet outage, and apparently her cameras also did not have any images or video right from that time frame when she disappeared, Blake.
It's not video, seems like from a past era. Do we know if the images are clean or clear?
No, and they're just thumbnails, and you know how small thumbnails can be. So, and it apparently doesn't help much because it doesn't have the time around when she was abducted. It does. They do show some people from previous days, which could be helpful. They can go back and look and see who those people are. In fact, they even apparently show the police when they first showed up on scene. So maybe there'll be some helpful things there. But the fact that it doesn't show anything from right when she was taken is obviously not a good thing.
And Brian, what can you tell me about the DNA?
Yeah, so we're still waiting. The big question here is the DNA inside the house, whether they're going to be able to use it. We know that it was mixed. I actually went to a DNA lab at Arizona State University. It was fascinating learning about how this process worked. And the forensics professor there zeroed in on something that I hadn't thought about. The fact, you know, the suspect had the ski cap on, the balaclava, but the mouth was still uncovered, which is a big deal because that means spit was coming out, which is very, very important for finding DNA. Listen to what she said to me, Blake. The nose, is that a very good thing?
It is a good thing, but knowing where he was at inside the home would be very difficult.
So just because he was in there breathing and spit was coming out,
we wouldn't know.
That doesn't tell us much about, they can't check the whole house.
They can look, but unless he spit a lot, they're not going to see a large quantity, and it's not going to fluoresce.
So it's kind of interesting. The saliva, apparently it's important if there's a large quantity, but just in terms of breathing and a little bit of spit coming out, she was explaining to me that is not always that helpful. But she was hopeful overall about the DNA. You know, science is improving every single day, and she's hopeful that they will be able to do the genetic genealogy and that may end up breaking the case open, Blake.
Brian Enton, live for us, Tucson, Arizona. Brian, thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.